Chapter 1, The Halloween Challenge. It was a typical Halloween night, but for us, Emily, Ryan, Jess, and me, it wasn't enough. Always on the hunt for something more thrilling than the usual parties and events, we decided that this year we would venture into something that would truly get our adrenaline pumping. The story we heard about Hollow Hill caught our attention. The legend of the massacre at the old abandoned house was perfect for our adventurous and skeptical spirit. We arrived at the property's entrance just as dusk was setting in. The old mansion looked even more imposing and eerie than any of us had expected. Its broken windows and collapsing roof seemed like the eyes and crown of a sleeping monster. The sun was setting, and the darkness was beginning to creep in, heightening our sense of vulnerability. Armed with flashlights and cameras, we entered the house with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The first impression was one of mold and rot, mixed with the feeling that the house had a dark history. Dust-covered furniture was draped in dirty sheets, and the floorboards creaked with every step we took. What really started to unsettle us were the strange signs we encountered. In one of the rooms, we found incomprehensible symbols carved into the walls and dried bloodstains that seemed to have no logical explanation. The house's heavy atmosphere felt like a constant presence, watching our every move. Despite our efforts to joke around and keep things light, it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of dread. As we explored further, Jess discovered a hidden room in the basement. The door was locked, but we managed to force it open with some effort. Inside, we found a collection of old newspaper boxes. As we began to leaf through the yellowed pages, we came across a series of articles about the Chainsaw Killer. The headlines were disturbing: Chainsaw Killer Strikes Again, and Maniac Vanishes Without a Trace. The articles recounted a series of brutal murders that had occurred in the area years ago and how the killer had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind a trail of fear and speculation. The newspapers revealed that the killer had been a feared and avoided figure, and the most disturbing thing was the belief that he returned every Halloween to continue his carnage. The stories detailed a series of unexplained disappearances and how the legend of the killer had become a local nightmare. What had started as a simple investigation was quickly turning into a deep dive into genuine horror. As we read the articles, the house seemed to come alive. A cold wind began to blow through the corridors, and the creaks of the floorboards grew more ominous. The sound of a chainsaw began to echo in the distance. It was a sound that seemed too real to be just a coincidence. Ryan and I tried to laugh it off, but the feeling that something was about to happen was almost palpable. We split up to investigate the sound, with Jess and Mike heading towards the basement where the noise seemed louder, while Emily and I stayed upstairs. Fear was growing, but we had a mission. We didn't know what awaited us, but we were determined to face whatever was necessary. Chapter 2, The Roar of Terror. The cold, biting wind howled through the darkening corridors as Emily and I made our way through the upper floors of the house. The eerie silence between the bursts of chainsaw noise was almost unbearable. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the hollow spaces, each creak of the floorboards magnifying the tension. We tried to make light of the situation, whispering jokes to ease our nerves, but it was futile. The weight of the house's history pressed down on us, and the unsettling feeling that we were being watched made every shadow seem alive. The wind rattled the broken windows, and each gust seemed to carry whispers from the past. As we ventured deeper into the upper floors, we found ourselves in a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Dusty furniture was covered in white sheets, and old photographs hung crookedly on the walls. The air was thick with decay and the faint smell of something long forgotten. Emily picked up one of the photographs, revealing a black and white image of a man with a menacing grin. It was one of the old headlines from the newspapers, showing the face of the chainsaw killer. Our uneasy feeling grew stronger as we heard a loud crash from below. It was followed by Jess's and Mike's frantic shouts. The sound was so sudden and alarming that we froze in place. We knew they were in trouble, but the idea of descending into the basement seemed almost as terrifying as the unknown danger. We quickly made our way back down the stairs, our hearts pounding with each step. The chainsaw's roar grew louder, more violent, and the floor seemed to vibrate with each rev of the engine. We reached the basement door, only to find it slightly ajar. The cold air that rushed through the crack was damp and carried an unmistakable scent of fear. Pushing the door open, we were met with a nightmarish sight. The basement was a chaotic mess of overturned furniture and scattered tools. In the middle of the room, the chainsaw lay on the ground, its engine still running but the killer nowhere in sight. Jess and Mike were nowhere to be found. The air was filled with the sound of the chainsaw's echoing growl, but there were no other sounds of life. We searched frantically, calling out their names, but our voices seemed to get swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Emily stumbled upon a trail of blood leading towards a small, hidden room at the back of the basement. With trembling hands, we opened the door and found it empty, save for more disturbing symbols carved into the walls. Just as we were about to leave, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening bang. The chainsaw's roar grew even louder, reverberating through the walls. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The killer had to be close, and every instinct told us to hide. We found a small alcove and huddled together, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The basement was now filled with a cacophony of sounds, the chainsaw's roar, the distant echo of screams, and the ominous creaking of the house as if it were alive and part of the horror. We knew we had to find a way out, but the terror of being hunted was overwhelming. The chainsaw's roar came closer, and we heard footsteps approaching. With no other options, we decided to make a run for it. As we dashed through the basement, the chainsaw's engine revved louder and closer, making the air vibrate with a fearsome energy. Our escape was a desperate sprint through the darkness, dodging debris and praying we could find a way out before it was too late. Chapter 3, The Descent into Madness. Our frantic escape through the basement was nothing short of chaotic. The chainsaw's roar was deafening, and the dark corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as we tried to find a way out. The feeling of being pursued was overwhelming, making every shadow and every sudden noise seem like a potential threat. As we ran, Emily and I took turns leading, each of us trying to stay calm despite the growing panic. The cold sweat on our brows mixed with the dust in the air, making it hard to see clearly. Our breaths came in ragged gasps, and we could hear our own footsteps echoing along with the chainsaw's menacing growl. At one point, we stumbled upon a narrow staircase leading even further down into the depths of the house. We had no other choice but to descend, hoping it would lead us to an escape route or at least buy us some time. The basement stairs creaked ominously under our weight as we made our way down, the smell of damp earth growing stronger. The lower level was even more unsettling than the one we had left. It was a labyrinth of small rooms and tight passages, cluttered with old, rotting furniture and strange, unidentifiable objects. The air was heavy with a musty odor, and the walls were covered in grime. We could still hear the chainsaw's engine revving intermittently, but it seemed to be coming from different directions, adding to our confusion. We tried to remain quiet as we moved, listening for any sign of the killer. Every so often, the chainsaw's roar would come closer, sending us into fits of terror. We found ourselves in a room with old medical equipment and surgical tools scattered around. The sight was disturbing, and it made us wonder if this place had been used for something far more sinister than just hiding. As we explored the eerie room, we noticed something on the floor, a trail of fresh blood leading to a hidden door in the corner. Our hope was momentarily renewed as we pried the door open, only to find another set of stairs descending even further. We were faced with a chilling realization: the deeper we went, the more trapped we felt. With no other options, we continued down the stairs. Each step felt like a descent into madness. The narrow staircase seemed to twist and turn, making us feel disoriented and lost. The air grew colder, and the chainsaw's roar became more sporadic, adding to the eerie silence of the lower level. We reached the bottom of the stairs and entered a large, dimly lit room. The flickering light from a single, overhead bulb cast eerie shadows on the walls. The room was filled with old, dusty furniture and strange artifacts that seemed to have no place in a normal house. It looked like a cross between a storage room and a macabre museum. In the center of the room was an old, wooden chair with straps attached to the arms and legs. The sight of it sent chills down our spines. It was clear that this place had been used for something horrifying. We could only imagine what kind of tortures might have taken place here. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind us. We spun around, our hearts racing, but saw nothing except the eerie shadows dancing on the walls. The chainsaw's roar had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that filled the room. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next terrifying moment. In that silence, we heard faint whispers, voices that seemed to be coming from all directions. The whispers grew louder, forming a chilling chorus of incomprehensible words. We were surrounded by a sense of dread that seemed almost tangible. Desperate to escape, we continued to search the room for a way out. Every corner we turned revealed more unsettling sights, but no clear exit. Our hope was fading as the whispers grew louder and more insistent. We knew we had to find a way out before the house's dark secrets consumed us completely. Chapter 4: The Unraveling Horror. Our desperate search for an exit led us through increasingly disturbing scenes. The chilling whispers grew louder, seeming to follow us as we navigated through the dimly lit room filled with grotesque artifacts. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the oppressive atmosphere made it difficult to think clearly. Emily and I clung to each other, our senses heightened by the pervasive fear. Every creak of the floorboards and every distant, muffled sound made our hearts race. We knew that time was running out. The chainsaw's roar had stopped, but the eerie silence that replaced it was just as terrifying. We continued our search, exploring every corner of the room, but the more we looked, the more it seemed like we were walking in circles. The shadows cast by the flickering light created nightmarish shapes on the walls, and every movement seemed to make them dance menacingly. As we reached the far end of the room, we discovered a hidden passageway behind a large, dusty curtain. With trembling hands, we pulled the curtain aside to reveal a narrow corridor leading further into the depths of the house. The corridor was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, and the air inside was cold and damp. We entered the passageway, the darkness swallowing us as we moved forward. The sound of our footsteps was muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Every few feet, we encountered small alcoves filled with old, forgotten objects, a broken mirror, an old doll, and other items that seemed to belong to another time. Each discovery only added to our sense of dread. The passageway seemed to go on forever, winding and twisting in a labyrinthine fashion. The whispers grew louder, more coherent, forming fragmented sentences that sent shivers down our spines. It was as if the house itself was alive and trying to communicate with us, revealing its dark secrets through disjointed whispers. Suddenly, the corridor ended in a large, metal door with a heavy lock. The door appeared ancient, its surface covered in rust and grime. The whispers had become a cacophony of distorted voices, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to press down on us. We knew that whatever lay beyond this door was the source of the house's terror. With a mix of fear and determination, we attempted to force the door open. It creaked and groaned in protest, but after a few tense moments, it gave way. Beyond the door was a large, dimly lit room filled with strange contraptions and horrifying tools. The room resembled a twisted version of an old laboratory, with tables covered in sinister-looking instruments and jars containing unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a large, grotesque machine with sharp blades and rusty gears. It was clear that this was the heart of the horror, the place where the most unspeakable acts had occurred. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the room seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. As we stepped into the room, the metal door slammed shut behind us with a resounding bang. The sudden noise made us jump, and we realized with a jolt that we were trapped. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional clank of metal or distant, unidentifiable noise. Emily and I searched the room desperately, trying to find another exit or any clue that might lead us to safety. The chilling whispers had returned, more insistent than ever. They seemed to come from all directions, merging into a single, overwhelming presence that threatened to drive us mad. We knew that we had to act quickly. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, and the sense of impending doom was palpable. We had to find a way out before the house's dark forces consumed us entirely. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. The oppressive silence of the laboratory-like room weighed heavily on us as Emily and I frantically searched for an escape. The grotesque machine in the center of the room loomed over us, a sinister reminder of the horrors that had occurred within these walls. The whispers continued their maddening chorus, and the sense of being watched was almost unbearable. Our hearts pounded as we moved through the room, examining every possible exit and trying to make sense of the strange contraptions around us. The fear of the unknown pushed us to keep moving, even as exhaustion began to set in. Every shadow seemed to shift and every sound seemed to be a threat. Suddenly, the dim light in the room flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. We were left with only the echoes of our own breathing and the relentless whispers that seemed to come from all directions. Emily clutched my arm, and I could feel her trembling beside me. In the pitch blackness, we heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Our breaths caught in our throats as we strained to see anything in the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, and then, out of nowhere, a dim light appeared, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows. It was him, the masked killer. His presence filled the room with an aura of malevolence. The chainsaw, which had been silent for what felt like hours, roared to life once again, its engine a deafening sound that echoed through the confined space. The killer's eyes glowed with a menacing intensity as he wielded the chainsaw with terrifying precision. We had no choice but to act quickly. Emily and I exchanged a determined glance, and with a mix of fear and resolve, we sprang into action. The room was filled with a chaotic flurry of movement as we attempted to dodge the killer's attacks. The chainsaw's blades sliced through the air with a sickening whine, and we had to stay constantly alert to avoid being caught. Our only hope was to find a way out of the room before the killer could corner us. We spotted a narrow passageway behind a stack of old crates and moved towards it, but the killer was relentless. His chainsaw roared louder, and the air was filled with the stench of gasoline and fear. As we squeezed through the narrow passageway, we found ourselves in a dark, cramped space that seemed to be a storage area for old household items. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and faded photographs. We could hear the killer's footsteps getting closer, and we knew we had to find an exit quickly. Our search was frantic as we rummaged through the cluttered space, trying to find anything that could help us escape. Amidst the chaos, Emily discovered a small, rusted door partially hidden behind a stack of old furniture. With renewed hope, we pried the door open and found a narrow staircase leading upwards. We climbed the stairs with all the speed we could muster, our hearts racing as we heard the killer's enraged shouts echoing behind us. The staircase seemed to go on forever, but we couldn't afford to stop. Our only chance was to reach the surface and find a way out of the house. Finally, we emerged from the staircase into a dimly lit hallway. The house was eerily quiet, and we could hear nothing but our own ragged breaths. We hurried down the hallway, our senses on high alert. The whispers had faded, but the feeling of dread lingered. At the end of the hallway, we spotted a window that was slightly ajar. With a final burst of energy, we rushed towards it, pushing it open with all our strength. The fresh air outside was a welcome relief as we climbed through the window and dropped down to the ground. We had escaped the house, but the terror of the night was far from over. As we looked back at the dark silhouette of the house against the night sky, we knew that the horrors within would haunt us forever. The house, with its dark secrets and twisted history, would never let go of its victims easily. Emily and I held each other tightly, knowing that we had survived a nightmarish ordeal. But as we walked away from the house, we couldn't shake the feeling that the true horror was far from over. The house had claimed its victims before, and it was only a matter of time before it would try to claim more.